Hilchos Megillah v'Chanukah Perek Shlishi. The laws of Megillah and Chanukah, chapter 3. Today we finished the laws of Purim. We go to the laws of Chanukah. Today is a very special day actually, because we are today 20% through the entire Rambam. 1/5 of the way through the entire Rambam. Is about 1,017 chapters, the way we study one chapter a day. There's really 1,000 chapters exactly in the Rambam. But because we also study like the introductions and the order of the prayers and the Haggadah text, so it comes out to 1,017 days. So if you divide that into 20%, that's about 204, 205. Today is day 205. So it's a big day for us. 20% through. If we did the first 20%, we can finish the last 80%, no doubt. L'chaim to that. So the Rambam begins today's chapter with the description of the miracle of Chanukah. Before we get to the actual laws of what we do on Chanukah, he describes the story that led up to it. And it's very curious, because the Rambam is a book of Jewish law, not a book of Jewish history. 2 days ago when we learned the story of Purim, we didn't get in the Rambam the whole story of Purim. So how come when it comes to Chanukah, we get the whole story of Chanukah? So I heard a fascinating story that there was a rabbi, Rabbi Natan Rabinowitz, who came to the Rebbe in 1977 for a private audience. And he was discussing with the Rebbe this question: how come the Rambam writes the story of Chanukah before he gets to the laws of Chanukah? And 2 answers came out of their discussion. One is a very fascinating answer. In the introduction to the Rambam, he writes that one of the purposes in writing this book was that a Jew, in order to be a practicing, educated Jew, wouldn't have to come on to any other books besides for the written Torah and the Rambam. Korei Adam b'Torah shebiktav tchila v'achar kach korei bazeh ve'eno tzarich sefer acher b'neihem. The Rambam says you read the written Torah, then you read this book, and you won't need any other books. Which means that before you begin the Rambam, the assumption is that you've read the entire Torah shebiktav. In the written Torah, we have the reasons for all the holidays. The story behind Pesach, the story behind Sukkot, the story behind even Purim. It's part of the written Torah. The Megillah of Esther is a written Torah. But Chanukah is the only one that's not in the written Torah. So the Rambam has to give you the story so that you can know what's behind the holiday of Chanukah. That's one interesting answer.
Where's the story of Purim in the written Torah?
In the book of Esther. The whole book of Esther, the story of Purim. It's part of the 24 books. It's not the 5 books of Moses, but it's part of the 24 books of the Tanakh. A second answer that the Rebbe gave him was that we're going to soon see the whole obligation to light Chanukah candles is pirsum hanes, is to publicize the miracle. That means that when you light the Chanukah candles and where you set it up, everything involves recognizing and publicizing the miracle. So you got to spend some time talking about what the miracle is in order to know what you're publicizing. Therefore, the Rambam spends considerable time, two full halachot, telling us the background story of Chanukah. Nevertheless, because the Rambam is extremely precise in his wording and super organized, the commentaries dissect every word of the way he chooses to tell the story and learn many things from it. The Rebbe himself spent many, many times in different talks and different letters analyzing the exact wording of the Rambam. I'm going to try to share with you some of them as we go through it today. So the Rambam begins, Halacha Aleph, Bebayis Sheni. The story of Chanukah happened during the time of the Second Temple. Right off the bat. Why does he say the Second Temple? Because we know in the Gemara that there was a big difference between the first and second temples. In the first temple, godliness was much more apparent. The Aron HaKodesh was there. Many, many things were on a much higher level than in the Second Temple. The Second Temple, we didn't have the Aron. There were other things that were missing in the temple, and because of that, that gave room for the possibility of the decree, because it was only the Second Temple, not the first one. And what happened? Keshemalchei Yavan gazru gzeiros al Yisrael. When the kings of Greece made decrees on Israel. Here again, exact wording. Yavan in the Talmud is related to Chochmat Yavan, the wisdom of the Greeks. All science and all wisdom that's outside of the Torah is called Chochmat Yavan. And part of the war of Chanukah on the Jews was not so much a physical war, it was a spiritual war. The Greeks were trying to have their ideology infiltrate the Jewish people. So the Rambam makes sure to call them Malchei Yavan, because these were kings that represented the wisdom of Greece. The concept of adapting sciences that are foreign to the Torah. And what did they do in practice? They made decrees on the Jews. Ubitlu dasam, v'lo hinichu oisam lasik b'teiro v'mitzvahs. 2 things. They canceled their religion in general, and they did not let them do Torah and mitzvahs. There's 2 elements here. There's one attack on the general religion, and another attack specifically on the actual practical study of Torah and mitzvahs. Talmud says that the Greeks wanted the Jews to deny the existence of God. So there's two elements. There's a kind of spiritual, abstract element and a practical, mitzvah-oriented element. Change the beliefs and stop doing Torah and mitzvahs. It's not clear which one came first. The Rebbe says from the order of the Rambam, it would seem like they first got them to, or their main intent was to get rid of their relationship with God, and then practically it spilled over into not doing Torah and mitzvahs, or the opposite happened. They began with Torah and mitzvahs, and in the end their intent was to deny God. But either way, there was two parts to their war. And then not only did it affect the holy element of the Jewish people, but it also affected their physical elements. Upashtu yadam b'mamoinam uvivneseim. They also stretched out their hands to attack the money, the property of the Jewish people, and their daughters. Talmud says that the Greeks made a decree. Every time a woman would go to her wedding, she had to first have relations with a Greek. They literally violated the Jewish girls. And they didn't just do it for physical reasons. The Rebbe once said, the Rebbe explains that even though this was an attack on their physical property and their physical daughters, but the goal here was something spiritual. They wanted the Jews to have money, but it should be non-kosher money. Use it for the wrong reasons. They wanted them to keep the Torah. Have your Jewish traditions. We love your Jewish culture. We love gefilte fish. But it should be with a way that divorces God from it. And this is what they did. Decrees on the religion, attack on the money, attack on the girls.
People are sick. I mean, what's it to them? Just do your own shtick.
Of course. Of course. V'nichnesu laheichal upartzu by pratzes. They went into the holy temple and they breached certain breaches. On the outer structure, they broke down parts of the wall. On the inside also, v'timu hatares. They made the things that were pure impure. V'tzar lahem liyisrael ma'id mipneim. It was very bothersome for the Jewish people because of them. Ulechatzum lachatz gadol, and they put them under a lot of pressure. Now, this would seem to be, an earlier thing, pressure. If you put it last, it sounds like it's the worst thing, the pressure. They're already violating your children, your money, Torah and mitzvahs, and the final thing that Rambam says is a lot of pressure. So the Rebbe once explained, because the pressure was to keep the Greek culture alive. You can stop somebody from doing something in the moment, but if he still holds on to his traditions, then in the end, when the pressure is off, he'll go back. He'll revert to his original ways. But if the pressure is constantly on to keep a new way of life, when you educate somebody with new values, that's the worst. Because then it seeps into their consciousness and it becomes who they are. And that was the pressure that the Greeks put on the Jews. They pressured them not only to just practically stay away from Torah and mitzvahs, but to adopt their values and their way of thinking. And this was, in general, the totality of the war of the Greeks. And all this continued until the God of our fathers had mercy upon them. And he saved them from their hands and he rescued them. Even here, it's fascinating. Even when the Rambam is talking about the miracle that God did, he calls him the God of our fathers. You can say in Hebrew, you can say two ways. You can say my God and the God of my fathers. My God means a close relationship. It's my God. I feel like it's my God. God of my fathers is like, it's the God of my fathers. I don't really connect with him so much. So you see here, even when Hashem saved them, to the Jews at the time, he was a little distant. He was the God of the fathers. And that's how the whole Chanukah story was able to evolve, because they weren't so closely connected to Hashem. Nevertheless, Hashem had mercy and he saved them. And that's the first thing we mentioned. We don't even get into the wars of the Maccabees and anything. The first thing is Hashem was the one that saved us. How did it practically happen? The Gavru b'nei Chashmonai hakoyanim hagdolim v'haragum. The high priests, the sons of the Chashmonean Empire, were the ones that overpowered the Greeks, and they killed them. V'hishiu Yisrael miyadam, and they saved them. They saved Israel from their hands. V'ha'amidu melech min hakoyanim, and after victory was restored, the Chashmonean people made a king from among these priests. V'chazra malchus liYisrael yasar al masayim shana ad ha'churban hasheni. And monarchy was brought back to Israel. The Jewish people now again were autonomous in their own land for more than 200 years, until, of course, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. Why does the Rambam call them the high priests? Just say they were sons of Chashmonaim. So if you remember way back when in the beginning of the Rambam. No, of course they were, but why is it important to say it? So in the beginning of the Rambam spoke about the idea that there are certain times when we're obligated to give our life for a mitzvah. Right? If a non-Jew comes to you and says, murder somebody or serve idols, there are 3 cardinal sins you have to give up your life for. Bishat Hashmad, at a time of when the government is just out to persecute the religion, you have to give your life for anything. But only while you're being actually forced to do the Avera. While you're not being forced, there's no permission to give your life to keep the Torah. So if one reads the Rambam simply and he wants to know how could the Chashmonean people who were so small, how could they go and fight a Greek army? How could they be Moser Nefesh? How could they give up their lives? Seemingly there's no permission. They weren't out to get into the 3 cardinal sins. So why are they giving their life? So the Rambam says they were Kohanim Gedolim, they were great priests. One of the commentaries to the Rambam says in the beginning of the Rambam that if you're a great person, you're allowed to give up your life to demonstrate your devotion to Hashem for any mitzvah. So because they were high priests, that's what gave them the permission to go on Mesirut Nefesh on behalf of the Jewish people to fight for them. Because they were people of great stature. At any rate, this was the first miracle, the physical miracle of Chanukah. They literally fought a war and saved themselves. Then, here's the picture of the war. Then there was the spiritual element. Says the Rambam Halacha Beis, Ukeshagavru Yisrael alayvehem ve'ibdum, when the Jewish people overpowered their enemies and they destroyed them, and the Talmud it says v'nitzchum, they won them. The Rambam says destroyed, because the real Jewish approach to somebody who's out to fight you is not just to win them, because you win them, they still stay around. You completely and utterly eradicate them. So the Rambam says, when they overpowered their enemies and they eradicated them, b'chamisha ve'esrim b'chodesh Kislev haya. It was the 25th day of Kislev. The Rambam holds that the war was won on the 25th day of Kislev, even though we celebrate the first day of Chanukah as the 25th of Kislev. We begin the night before, but the Rambam holds they won that day. What did they do? The Kohanim went into the Holy Temple. Famous story. They didn't find any pure oil in the temple because the Greeks had made them all impure. They only found one small jug. There was only enough oil to light for how many days? For one day. And nevertheless, miraculously they were able to light the candles, the lamps that were set up on the menorah for 8 days, till they were able to press new olives and produce new pure oil. The Rebbe says it's interesting because if they won the war on that day and they came in that day, they probably didn't have enough time to clean up the whole temple. We're used to, in our kids' education, we're taught that they came into the temple, right? They cleaned it all up, and then they lit the menorah. But if they won the war on the 25th day of Kislev, and the same day they lit the menorah, it's a bit hard to say that they cleaned everything up. They probably lit it, just emergency lighting, and then they cleaned up later all the other stuff.
Yeah, but they would have had to look first for the oil.
They probably did a little search and they found it. And that was it. Why couldn't they use impure oil? According to halacha, if you don't have pure oil, it's totally okay to use impure oil.
Yeah, but it has to be
So why did Hashem make the miracle?
Isn't it?
No, that's in order for it to be pure.
Isn't it?
But it does. But
They could have taken any oil.
yes, they could have taken any oil. But once you're dealing with the Jewish community, you don't have to have pure oil. So why did Hashem make a miracle? The miracles aren't for nothing. No, I get it. They have enough for one day, right? So light the menorah that one day, good. And then the next day use impure oil. There's no problem. Halachically, there's no problem to use impure oil. So why did Hashem make this big miracle? That's the question. So Chassidus explains that here we see Chibatan Shel Yisrael, the great love that Hashem has to the Jewish people, because they put their necks out and sacrificed their lives for Him. Hashem said, I'm going to do you a miracle. I'm going to give you a bonus points. I'm going to make sure that your oil is pure. You do the mitzvah in the best possible way because you did your best for me. So here we have the menorah lighting in the temple.
So where did they get 8?
Huh? We have 8, well, we're going to see. We have 8 because of the 8-day miracle. But in the temple, it was only 7 branches. Says the Rambam Halacha Gimel, Umipnei zeh, because of this. What's because of this? Because of both halachot, both the physical miracle and the spiritual miracle. Hiskinu chachamim sheba'isei adar, the sages who were around at that generation, they enacted sheyiyu shmeinas yamim ha'elu, that these 8 days, shetchilasan chafei bekislev, which begin 25th of Kislev, they should be yemei simcha v'halel, days of joy and praise. This is 2 things for the 2 miracles. Simcha is physical joy for the physical miracle. Hallel is spiritual praise. It's a soul praise for the miracle of the oil, of the candles, which are more of a spiritual thing. And what do we do practically to express this joy and this praise? Umadlikin b'hen hanerais ba'erev. We light lamps, we light candles every evening. Al pischei abatim, b'chol laila v'laila mishmeinas haleilis, at the entrances to our homes, and every night of the 8 nights. And we're going to learn more about this tomorrow. This is in Jerusalem. You see a guy, they actually do the mitzvah properly. They light the menorah on the door of their home. And that's what we do. Lahares ulegales hanes, to show, to display, to reveal the miracle. V'yamim elo hina nikrayin Chanukah. And these days are called Chanukah. Chanukah literally means inauguration because they rededicated, they reinaugurated the temple use in those days. Ve'hin asurin behesped v'tainis kimei Purim. These days of Chanukah are forbidden to make eulogies, to make fasts, like the days of Purim. V'hadlakas haneris behen, mitzvah midivrei soifrim kikriyas ha-Megillah. And the obligation to light candles on these days is a rabbinic commandment, just like reading the Megillah. So if you make every effort to come to them, hear the Megillah on Purim, you should make the same effort to light the menorah on Chanukah. Halacha dalid, kol shechayav b'kriyas ha-Megillah, chayav b'hadlakas ner Chanukah. Any Jew who is obligated to read the Megillah is also obligated to light the Chanukah lights. V'hamadlikoisa b'layla harishayin. One who actually lights the candles himself on the first night of Chanukah, mevarich shalish brachos, he makes 3 blessings. The Eluhain, they are the following, and they appear on the screen. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Some texts have shel Chanukah, some texts don't. Blessed are you, Hashem, sanctified us with His mitzvahs, and commanded us to light the candle of Chanukah. That's the second one. Thank God for making miracles to our ancestors these days, this time and those days. And the blessing of She'echiyanu. Anybody who's walking around in the streets and sees Chanukah lamps, and he himself did not make a blessing. Shulchan Aruch says this means he's not planning to. Maybe he doesn't have a menorah, he's not able to. For some reason, he's not going to be lighting candles. And no one's lighting candles for him. And he's walking around on the first night of Chanukah and he sees Chanukah lights, someone else's Chanukah lights, mevarich shtayin, he should make 2 blessings. The last 2. You can't make the blessing to light the lamps because you didn't light the lamps. But you're seeing other people's lamps make the blessing of the miracles in Shechianu. Ubishar haleilos, the rest of the nights of Chanukah, from night 2 and onwards, hamadlik mevarich shtayim v'haraya mevarich achas. One who himself is lighting the candles should make the first 2 blessings, not Shechianu because it's not new anymore. And the person who sees candles and is not planning to light them himself should make only 1 blessing of She'asan Nisim La'aviseinu. She'ein mevarchin Shechianu ella balayla harishan, because we only make the blessing of Shechianu on the first night of Chanukah. Now, the rest of the laws of Chanukah lamps are going to come tomorrow. From here, the Rambam goes on to talk about the second obligation of Chanukah, which is Hallel. Halacha hey b'chol yom v'yom mishmeinas hayamim elu goimrin es Hallel. Every one of the 8 days of Chanukah, we complete the entire Hallel. This is the blessing of Hallel and the beginning of Hallel as it is in the Siddur. Umevarech lefanav, you make a blessing before it. Asher kechanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu ligmar es Hallel. That's the Sephardi custom, to conclude the Hallel. Ashkenazim say likroi es Hallel, to read the Hallel. Bein yachid, bein sibur, whether you're in alone or you're in a community, it's an obligation to say Hallel. Hallel is said many other times. The Rambam chose to include the laws of Hallel and the laws of Chanukah, and the commentaries discuss why that is. The simple reason the Rebbe says is because when it comes to Chanukah, Hallel is an integral part of the day. Every other festival, the festival has its own thing, and Hallel is also said to add to the joy. On Chanukah, the whole holiday was made for Hallel. So the Rambam discusses all the laws of Hallel, which apply to all the other times of the year as well, but he puts it in the laws of Chanukah. And so today's chapter, from here till the end, we're going to be learning the laws of saying Hallel. So the Rambam begins, Afal pi shekriyas Hallel mitzvah midivrei seifrim. Even though the reading of the Hallel is only a rabbinic commandment, Mevarich alav, you still say the blessing Asher kichanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu, that Hashem gave us His mitzvahs, commanded us, kederach shemevarich al ha-Megillah of ala eruv. The same way you make a blessing on reading the Megillah and on making an eruv, whether it's an eruv to allow you to carry from one to the other, one quarter to the other, whether it's an eruv to allow you to cook from one day of holiday to Shabbat, as we've seen earlier in this book. But the point is, we make a blessing like all rabbinic mitzvahs because Hashem commanded us to listen to the rabbis. Shekol v'adeh shel divrei mevarchin alav. Anything that we do rabbinically, but certainly, in other words, it's an active mitzvah, we make a blessing for it. But anything which we do rabbinically, but it's only being done out of doubt, like separating a tithe from demai, from unknown grain. We haven't had this slide in a while, but this is the famous slide about the gifts of produce. Every time a farmer gets a new crop, you have to give truma, 2% to the Kohen, and then maaser rishon, 10% to the Levi, and then maaser sheni, 10% either to Jerusalem or to the poor, depending on which year of the Shemitah cycle you're in. Now, there is a concept called demai. Demai means questionable grain, because it was a time period in Jewish history when certain members of the Jewish religion were known to give only the truma. They gave the 2%, but they wouldn't give maaser. They wouldn't give the 10%. And so when you bought grain from them, you were now in doubt as to whether this grain had already been taken maaser. So the rabbi said, if you buy grain from such a person who's suspect not to take maaser, you have to yourself take again a tenth. But it's only out of doubt. So since you're only doing it out of doubt, that's what the Rambam says, maaser demai, taking maaser from questionable grain, ein mevarchen alav. We don't make a blessing on it because you're only doing it out of doubt. Well, if that's the case, v'lama mevarchen al yom tov sheni, v'heim lo tiknu ala mipnei asafek, why do we make a blessing on the second day of holiday? Second day of holiday was only made by the rabbis out of doubt, as we saw in the other halachot about the Jewish calendar. Really, it's only one day, only because the Jews didn't get the news of when the new month was, so they didn't know when it was, so they kept second day out of doubt. So why do we make a blessing shechianu? Kadesh lo yazal zalubay. So Jews shouldn't treat it with disdain, cheaply. Can you imagine if you only make a blessing the first day, not the second day? All Jews will start saying, first day is more important, second day is less important. The rabbis didn't, they wanted to avoid that. So they said, you know what, make a blessing on both days, treat them both equal. Back to Hallel though. Halacha vav. V'loi Hallel shel Chanukah bilvad. Hu shemidivrei sofrim. It isn't only the reading of Hallel on Chanukah that's rabbinic. Ela kriyas Hallel lo'olam midivrei sofrim. V'chol hayamim shegarmin b'hanas Hallel. The reading of the Hallel is always rabbinic on all the days which we say full Hallel. When are those days? When do we say full Hallel? So the Rambam says in Israel, Shmoina Asar Yom Bashana mitzvah ligbar b'hanas Hallel. For 18 days a year, it's a mitzvah to complete, to say the entire Hallel. The Elohein, they are the following: Shmoinas Yemei Chag, the 8 days of Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret. Ushmoinas Yemei Chanukah, 8 days of Chanukah. V'Rishon Shel Pesach v'Yom Atzeres, the first day of Pesach, and the 1 day of Shavuot. Avor Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim ein bahen Hallel. On the New Year and on Yom Kippur, we don't say Hallel. If Yishahin Yemei Tshuva v'Yira v'Fachad. These are days of repentance, of fear, of awe. Lo Yemei Simcha Yisera. It's not a day to be extra joyous. So we don't say Hallel on those days, and also v'Lo Tiknu Hallel b'Purim. We don't do Hallel on Purim. Shekriyas HaMegillah. Hi HaHallel, because reading the Megillah itself is like the praise. That's how we praise Hashem. So no need to do extra Hallel. That's all in Israel. What about in the diaspora? Halacha Zayin, Mekayma Yisrael Yom Tov Shnei Yamim, a place where they do 2 days of holiday. Goymer Nasa Hallel Echad ve'Esrim Yom. There are 21 days that we complete the Hallel. This picture actually on the screen here is a picture from the Alter Rebbe's Sidur. And if you can see here in the small text, he says, V'hasiman hi bivtach. The sign to know when we say full Hallel is bet bet tet chet. 2298. I'm going to show you what this means. This is in big. Bivtach. Bet is the 2 days, the 2 first days of Pesach. The second bet is the 2 days of Shavuot. Tet, which is the numerical value of 9, is the 9 days of Sukkot, because we have 7 days of Sukkot plus Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, so it's 9 days. And then the 8 days of Chanukah. The Rambam will go in a bit of a different order, but this is a sign to remember it. Bivtach. 2298. So what is the Rambam's order? Tisha Yemei HaChag, the 9 days of the holiday of Sukkot, again including Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. U'shmoina Yemei Chanukah, 8 days of Chanukah. U'shnei Yamim Shel Pesach, U'shnei Yamim Shel Atzeres. 2 days of Pesach, 2 days of Shavuot. What about the rest of Pesach? How come we don't say complete Hallel? That's what we were saying before, that we only say full Hallel when there's something unique about that day. Each day of holiday is unique. On Sukkot, each day had a different sacrifice in the temple. And on Chanukah, each day we add light. But on the last days of Pesach, it was the same sacrifices repeated. So we don't do the full Hallel. Aval b'Rosh Chodashim, but on Rosh Chodesh, which is the most common knowledge of people have saying Hallel, Kriyas HaHallel minhag ve'enei mitzvah. Reading Hallel is only a custom, it's not a mitzvah. O minhag zeh b'tzibur. Also, the custom only applies in the congregation, in the minyan. Lefichach koden b'dilug. And therefore, because it's only a custom, we don't read the whole Hallel. We read what's called half Hallel. We skip around. Ve'ein mevarchen alav, we also don't make a blessing. She'ein mevarchen ala minhag, because we don't make a blessing on just customs. V'yachid lo yikra klal. If you're an individual alone, you shouldn't even read the Hallel at all on Rosh Chodesh. Being hischil yashlim. Only if you started, finish it. V'yikra b'dilug kederach shekoden hatzibur, and you should read with skipping, like the community reads. V'chein mishar yemei Pesach koden b'dilug k'Rosh Chodashim. Last 6 days of Pesach, we also read with skipping, like on Rosh Chodesh. What does it mean skipping? Ketzad medalgin. How exactly does this skipping look like? So Maschilin mitchilas Hallel ad chalamish l'mayim mayim. We begin from the beginning of Hallel and we go till the end of chapter 114 of Psalms, chalamish l'mayim mayim. This red box here, we skip. Umedaleg, you skip a little bit. V'oimer Hashem zecharanu yivarech. You continue over here. That's in the middle of Psalm 115. Hashem zecharanu yivarech v'chulu ad halaluka, till over here halaluka. Umedaleg, and again you skip this paragraph called Ahavti, the beginning of Psalm 116. V'oimer ma ashiv laHashem ad halaluka. And then you say this paragraph, ma ashiv, till halaluka. Now, in our custom, from here on we don't skip anymore. But the Rambam actually has another skipping. Umedaleg, v'oimer min hametzar karasika ad seif halal. You skip, according to the Rambam, you skip this little paragraph here, and the 4 verses of Hodu, till min hametzar, till here. That's where you pick it up. Until the end of Hallel. Zeu aminag apasha, that's the widespread custom. V'yesh medalgin dilug acher. There are those who skip in other ways, and as I said, that's our custom. We skip the first 2 paragraphs, but we don't skip anymore. Halacha tes, kol hayoim kosher likriyas hallel. All day is kosher for Hallel. Again, we say it during prayer, but you can say it all day really. Ta'akriyas hallel lemafreya. Huh? Yeah.
Individually, you don't have to have any.
Yeah. In the days that you say full Hallel.
Yeah.
Like holidays, etc. Yeah. If you read Hallel backwards, lo yatsa, out of order, you're not fulfilling your obligation. Kara v'shah v'chazar v'kara. If you read part of it, then you delay, you take a pause, and then you keep reading. Afal pisha shaha kedei ligmar eskula yatsa. Even if you're delayed enough time to finish the entire thing, you fulfill your obligation. Yamim shegemrin b'hanas Hallel, on days which we complete the entire Hallel, yesh lehafsik bin perek leperek. You're allowed to make an interruption between chapters. Aval be'emtza perek lo yafsik. But in the middle of the chapter, you should make no interruptions. V'yamim shekorin b'hen bedilug, afilu be'emtza perek paisik. On days which we read Hallel in skipping, you could even make interruptions in the middle of the chapter. La halacha, we treat Hallel as if you're in the middle of the Shema. Same way in the middle of the Shema, you don't even motion somebody, it's a completely non-interruption. You should make no interruptions during Hallel. It's super strict. Yod, kol yom shegemrin b'yasa Hallel mevarech lefanov. Any day upon which we complete the entire Hallel, you make a blessing before the Hallel, as we said before. Umakim shenagu levarech acharav mevarech. And also, if it's your custom to make a blessing after Hallel, you make a blessing after Hallel, which is what we do. This last paragraph over here, Yahalelucha. Ketzad mevarech. How do you make a blessing after Hallel? The Rambam gives us his own text over here. You say, Yahalelucha Hashem Elokeinu kol ma'asecha. All of your creatures should praise you, Hashem. V'tzadikim v'chasidim ma'aseh etzenecha. The righteous, the pious who do your will, should also praise you. V'chol amcha beis Yisrael berina yedu lishmecha. Your entire nation Israel with song should praise your name. Ki ata Hashem l'cha tov l'hoides. Because to you God, it is good to praise. V'noyim l'shimcha l'zamer. It's sweet to sing to your name. U'mi'olam v'adeilam ata hakel. You are the God from world to world. In other words, forever and ever. Baruch ata Hashem. Blessed are you, God. HaMelech, HaMehulal, HaMeshubach, HaMefayar. The King who is praised, glorified, exalted. Chai v'kayam tamid yim lech le'lam v'ad. You live and you last forever. Forever you should rule over the world forever. Yud Aleph. Yesh mekaymes shenagu lichpel. There are some communities who have the custom to repeat verses in the Hallel. We do this too. Me'oidcha ki anisani ad seif hallel koiflin kol davar v'davar shtei pa'amim. If you pay attention, from the middle of here, min hametzar karastika, right over here by odcha ki anitani, we begin to say each verse twice. Odcha ki anitani, even ma'asu abaynim, me'esr shemesh zayis, zayim asa Hashem, an Hashem Moshiach we say twice, an Hashem Atlichna, the whole thing till the end, all double verses. Umakim shenagu lichpel yichpel, umakim shenagu shlei lichpel ein koiflin. If it's your custom to say the words, the verses twice, say them. If not, don't say them. It's all a matter of custom. Says the Rambam, you should know, Yud Beis, minhag kriyas hallel b'mei chachamim harishayim kachaya. The custom of reading Hallel in the days of the early sages was a whole different custom than what we're used to. Today, everybody in Shul reads the whole Hallel, and we just know how we do it. In times of old, people were illiterate. Not everybody knew how to say the whole Hallel. There were no Sidurim. So here's how they would do it. The Hallel became a responsive experience. Only the Chazan would lead it, and everybody would be calling out different words in response.
Interactive. Yeah.
Says the Rambam, Achar shemevarech hagadol shemakre as hallel. The biggest guy in the shul, in other words, the most important guy in the shul, he would read the Hallel, he would chant the Hallel. So he would first make the blessing, and after he makes the blessing, maschil va'omer hallelujah. Let's take a look at the picture itself so you can see what it is. He begins and he says the first word, hallelujah. V'chol ha'am einin hallelujah. And everybody repeats after him. They answer this word. And this becomes the chant that they say the entire time. The chayzer v'omer hallelu avdei Hashem. The leader of the community, the chazan, screams the next three words, Hallelu Avdei Hashem. But everybody answers back, they don't repeat those words. V'chol ha'am einin Hallelujah. They keep on screaming this word, Hallelujah. V'chayzer v'aymer Hallelu es Shem Hashem. The leader says the next a couple of words. V'chol ha'am einin Hallelujah. They keep answering the first word. V'chayzer v'aymer Yehi Shem Hashem mevayrach me'ata v'ad elam. V'chol ha'am einin Hallelujah. Next verse, and they're answering. This is like their go-to word over here. They're listening to the Chazan lead the Hallel, but they are just responding Hallelujah. V'chein al kol davar v'davar, and so too. V'chein al kol davar, so too in every word. Every word means every half sentence. In each verse, the Chazan would stop. Everybody would answer Hallelujah. Ad shenimtzu einin b'chal ha'halel Hallelujah meya v'sholosh v'esrim pa'amim. If you follow the Hallel, they're going to end up saying Hallelujah 123 times. Siman lahem, the sign to remember. This number is Shnaisav Shal Aharon, the years of Aharon HaKohen. He lived 123 years. But Rambam doesn't just give signs, with no meaning. The reason why he says this is because he wants to tell you that answering all 123 times are one unit. You can't just answer once or twice. The same way a person's years, right? His entire life is one constant, made up of a bunch of years. Answering Hallel is one constant made up of a bunch of answers. And why does he choose to tell you Aaron? You couldn't find another thing that's 123? Because there's a big argument about this type of Hallel. Some commentaries say that when these people would answer Hallelujah, they weren't actually fulfilling their obligation of saying Hallel. Just because they were illiterate, so the rabbis gave them a way to be part of it. But answering Hallelujah isn't the ideal way of saying Hallel. The Rambam, though, holds that no. When you answer Hallel in a community like this, you're actually considered to be saying the entire Hallel. And as such, there's much more achdut, much more unity among the Jewish people. Because we're allowing much more Jews to be part of it. Who is the Jew who we know for achdut? Aharon HaKohen. Ohev Shalom, V'radef Shalom. He loved peace, he chased peace. When he passed away, all the Jewish people cried for him, even the women. When Moshe passed away, it says, Bnei Yisrael cried for him, the men. Aaron, men and women. Why? Because he made peace, he constantly made achdut. And this is probably why the Rebbe says, Al derech haremez, more of a hint way, why the Rambam puts the laws of Hallel in the laws of Chanukah. Because we're going to see in the end of tomorrow's chapter, the Rambam talks about how the entirety of Torah is to make peace, to make unity in the world. So the Rambam incorporates the minhag of Hallel, which is also related to peace, related to unity, as seen in the years of Aharon, who was the man of peace. Halacha Yud Gimel. Let's keep going. How did this Hallel in the community work? When the reader would reach the beginning of every new chapter, that was the only time that the Jews would repeat the words that he said. All Hallel, they're answering Hallelujah. But at the beginning of every chapter, they take a break and repeat those words. Ketzah, what does that look like? When he reaches Psalm 114 and he says, B'tzeis Yisrael mi-Mitzrayim, Kol ha'am chayzrin va'imrin b'tzeis Yisrael mi-Mitzrayim. Just for those three words, everybody answers the original words. Then the reader continues, Bet Yisrael mi'am lo'ez, v'chol ha'am einin, back to Hallelujah. Ad sheyamar, till he keeps on going, till he says, Ahavti ki yishma Hashem es kreli tachanunai, the beginning of Psalm 116. V'chol ha'am chayzrin va'imrin, Ahavti ki yishma Hashem v'chulei. And everybody repeats those words. The Rambam kind of skipped this chapter. Lo Lanu is also the beginning of a new chapter. Some say it's because, according to the Jerusalem Talmud, these are all considered to be one chapter. But other commentaries say,
According to the Jerusalem Talmud,
the B'tzet Yisrael and Lo Lanu is all one chapter of Tehillim. But there are other manuscripts where the Rambam, these words are added. That also here, by Lo Lanu, everybody repeats Lo Lanu, and then the Chazan keeps going until the next chapter. But either way, at this chapter for sure, the beginning of the chapter, everybody repeats these words, and then they go back to Hallelujah. When he reaches down here, Psalm 117, they repeat those words, because it's the beginning of a chapter, and then they go back to saying Hallelujah. Now there's one exception to this. At the end over here, by Ana Hashem Hashiana, Yudalet HaKoyre Eimer Ana Hashem Hashiana, Veheim Einin Acharav Ana Hashem Hashiana, Afal Pisha Einei Reish Perek. The reader, when he says these words, Ana Hashem Hashiana, everybody repeats those words, even though it isn't the beginning of a chapter. Hu Eimer Ana Hashem Matzlichana, Vehein Eimerim Ana Hashem Matzlichana. And also the next line. When he says Ana Hashem Matzlichana, they also repeat those exact words. And even the next line, over here, Hu Eimer Baruch Haba. When he says these words, Baruch Haba, even though it isn't the beginning of a chapter, Kol ha'am oimrim Baruch haba. Everybody answers Baruch haba, or some texts have everybody answers B'Shem Hashem, the next words. But either way, that's the way you do Hallel in a community. The im haya hamakres Hallel katanoi evedo isha. What if the whole community is illiterate and they needed to have a child? He's the only one who knows how to read the Hallel properly, or a slave, or a woman. Then you don't do this responsive Hallelujah thing. If you're not being led by a proper adult male, you have to actually repeat every word so you fulfill your obligation. You answer them word by word what they're saying for the entirety of the Hallel. Says the Rambam, Zehu Hamina Garishon. What I've just described was the original custom of saying Hallel. That's the way to really follow it. This is the way, it's actually fitting. Unlike the other people who hold that this responsive way is like just a fake to get the Jews involved. According to the Rambam, you should originally follow this custom because it actually brings Jews together. But nowadays, I've seen, says the Rambam, in many places, all kinds of weird customs and how they read the Hallel, how people answer. No one of them is similar to another one of them, and I guess just communities do what they do. But the original custom is that everybody should get together, leader says each word, and everybody answers Hallelujah.